Hare Krishna. Thank you for coming at the right time. In the packets that you'll get later, these over here, and please don't take them out now. Don't take anything from the packet out now. But there's some shastra in there. There's some some quotations from Srila Prabhupada on the holy names, and there's some Bhagavatam verses, and there's also some sections of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, because you'll have time, and when you're having your own Krishna time, you'll have some time, and the specific things you want you to do with some of that, and some of it is just for your reading as you feel inspired. So the Bhagavatam section that is in the booklet is Narada Muni's meeting of Srila Vyasadeva in the 5th chapter of the 1st canto. And we'll cover, not in detail, but we'll cover an overview of the verses that are included in that booklet. And then when you're alone with Krishna, and you can read them in more detail, and you can read through the Prabhupada's purports as well. So the situation in which Narada Muni, who was the spiritual master of Srila Vyasadeva, the situation in which he approaches his disciple is Vyasadeva is experiencing despondency. He's feeling an dissatisfaction in his heart, in his consciousness. Now, he's already compiled all the Vedic literature up to the point of Vedanta Sutra. But yet, he nevertheless feels dissatisfied. So something isn't quite right, something isn't quite correct in his consciousness. And that's causing him some deep unhappiness, even though he's accomplished so much on the spiritual level, and even though he himself is empowered, he's the Supreme Lord, practically speaking, Vyas, who's empowered to compile the Vedic literatures, but yet he's wondering, what is the cause of my dissatisfaction? It reminded me, to some degree, of what the devotees were speaking about yesterday, about something is not quite complete in my Krishna consciousness, that there has to be an internal matching to the external activities that I've done. And of course, we do know from Chaitanya Charitamrita after Brahmananda Brahmate Konya Bhagavan Ji, Guru Krishna Prasadi Bhai Bhakti Lata Beach, that the bija, the seed of devotion, our devotional service really doesn't reach its completion until it takes shelter of Krishna in the spiritual world and this prema bhakti. So in one sense, the question really is coming up is how to develop prema bhakti, or what's the step to counteract the dissatisfaction. So while Vyasadeva is thinking in this way, what is the fault in my consciousness, in my practice, that's causing this dissatisfaction, then amazingly enough, and his spiritual master appears just at that time. Narada Muni appears. So this is, in and of itself, this is a significant point, because when we are sincerely inquiring or praying, or if we sincerely desire to take a next step forward in our spiritual life, of course it's up to Krishna ultimately, but then Krishna will appear in some form or another. And here, Narada Muni himself is coming, his spiritual master. So the verse says, thus the sage amongst the gods, Narada, comfortably seated and apparently smiling, he addressed the Rishi amongst the Brahmins. He spoke to Vyasadeva. And the first thing he said was, are you satisfied by identifying with the body? By identifying with the body or the mind as the object of self-realization? So he's immediately hinting at, not even so indirectly, what the issue is. And it is very relevant for us because most of us, when we think of spiritual life and what it's really supposed to be, we're really thinking shanti, 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 shanti. We're really trying to stop the crazy mind from giving us so much trouble. But that isn't actually the essence of spiritual life at all. And nor is it having a fit body, etc., as per the yoga system. So are you satisfied by identifying with the body or the mind as the object of self-realization? And then he starts asking him, inquiring from him. Your inquiries were full, the questions that you've asked were full, and your studies were also well fulfilled. You compiled all the Vedic literature, and there is no doubt that you have prepared a great and wonderful work, the Mahabharata, which is full of all kinds of Vedic sequences, elaborately explained. So you've done so much already. And it is so filled with knowledge, important knowledge, so much of the truths, the Shastra, the scriptural truths. You were the one who compiled it, and yet you're the one not feeling satisfied. And you have even completely described the subject of Brahman, as well as the knowledge derived that comes from that understanding. Then he asked the question, why should you be despondent? What's another word for the word despondent? First in English.
Dissatisfaction.
Yeah, but raise your hand so it doesn't all come out at once. Yes, what did you say?
I said dejected.
Dejected, yeah.
Dissatisfaction.
Yeah. Dejected is one level more intense than dissatisfied. And what's the proper Hindi word?
Asantushti.
Yeah, dissatisfied. Dejected. Hindi.
Nirash.
Huh?
Nirash.
Niras. No ras. And Russian?
No asha.
No asha, no hope. Yeah, that's really good. Again? Wow. That's heavy. Niras. Yeah.
Udas.
Udas. Okay, what is udas?
Sad.
Sad, yeah. All true. Why should you be despondent despite all that you have done and thinking that you're undone, you have no use, my dear Prabhu? He calls him my dear Prabhu. Right? Prabhupada translated word by word, my dear sir. And Srila Vyasadeva answered, all that you have said about me is perfectly correct. I've done all of this. But despite all of this, I am not pacified, I am not peaceful. And the Prabhupada once walking in the early days. Maybe you can just get water out of there in case. He was walking by the Pacific Ocean, which is the west coast of the United States, and he asked, why is it peaceful? Because Pacific means peaceful. So he asked, why is this ocean peaceful? Wait a second. I'm not Prabhupada, and you're not the disciple. And that's one of those questions I was sort of asking and just waiting for everyone to think about. And then I was going to answer it myself. I'm not myself, but just repeat what Prabhupada said. But okay, go ahead. You're so enthusiastic.
In fact, this.
No, in fact, what did Prabhupada say? Because none of the devotees answered properly. Do you know? Wait.
Actually,
No, just say what he didn't say. Actually, he didn't say.
that I don't know.
Okay, then don't answer. Later on, you can answer like anything. He said, it is peaceful because it is deep. So without being deep, one cannot be peaceful. But how deep is deep? You want to answer that one? No. You can't start with actually. You have to, if you either know or you don't know. How deep is deep? We're going to find out. Go away. So he said, continued speaking to his Narada Muni, my Lord, everything that is mysterious is known to you, because you worship the creator and the destroyer of the material world and the maintainer of the spiritual world, the original personality of Godhead. You worship the Purana Purusha, the Purusha Purana, the oldest person, the supreme person. You worship Krishna. And he is transcendental to the modes of material nature. Now this is actually, I said actually. Sorry. Now I'm not allowed to criticize you for saying actually. This is so difficult to understand in depth. He is, the Supreme Lord is beyond the modes of material nature, and the fact that we can't understand a situation, we know theoretically it's because we are covered or controlled by the modes of material nature, but we know this theoretically. What would be our experience of ourselves if the modes of material nature weren't affecting us, infecting us, and affecting us? What would be our experience of ourselves? Now this, we know that we're souls. We've read it in the first lesson of the Bhagavad Gita. We know from Chaitanya Charitamrita that we are Krishna's servant, Krishna Nityadas. But what is the experience? To experience ourselves free from the modes of material nature, but not only free from the modes of material nature, the controlling forces of Maya, not only that, because that's what the impersonalists tried to do. They tried to remove, to slow down the mind through neti, I'm not this, no activity, just so that the mind becomes in sattva guna, and then the mode of goodness, and then sattvam sanjayate jnanam. Then when the mind is peaceful, fully at rest, then one experiences that one is not the body, but one is eternal. But this, beyond that, is what Narada Muni wants to teach. Like the sun, Vyasadeva says, your goodness can travel everywhere in the three worlds, and like the air, you can penetrate the internal region of everyone. You can enter my heart, he's saying, and you can understand what's really there. And when you understand what's really in my heart, you'll understand my fault. And therefore, please, you're like the super soul, but please, therefore, find out my deficiency find out my deficiency. He's asking for that. He's so sincere. Find out my fault so I can correct myself. Instruct me, what should I do to remove this despondency? Because I can see that this despondency is not the actual disease, but it's the effect of the disease. I want to get to the point of the disease. Find out the deficiency in me despite my being absorbed in transcendence under disciplinary regulations and vows I'm doing everything correctly, but yet there's something not right. And Narada Muni in the next verse, he begins to speak. And he says it directly what the problem is, because he's the author. He's written so many books. He's compiled all the Vedic literatures. And he says, you have not actually broadcast the sublime and spotless glories of the personality of Godhead. This is the fault. You haven't directly spoken and broadcast the glory of Krishna. And the philosophy that does not satisfy the transcendental senses of the Lord is considered worthless. Kilam means inferior, less. So what you get from that, well, one thing in that last sentence, the philosophy that does not satisfy the transcendental senses of the Lord is considered worthless. So what is the purpose of all the writing? What is the purpose of all the activity? Is it to please me? Is it to please everyone? Is it to... No. It's to please the senses of Krishna, to please Krishna. So your words, you've done so much, but so far you haven't glorified Krishna. You haven't pleased him in that way. And therefore, it is, I can say Chinese, but not in Chinese would be Mo-yo. It's Cantonese. It means useless, inferior, worthless. Although, great sage, you have very broadly described the four principles beginning with religious performances, Dhamma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, you have not described the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva. And those words that do not describe the glories of the Lord, who can alone sanctify the atmosphere of the whole universe, are considered by saintly persons to be like a pilgrimage place for crows. And since the all-perfect persons are inhabitants of the transcendental abode, they do not derive any pleasure there. So all you have done is worthless. And he's compiled all the Vedic literatures. And the symptom of the fact that it is insufficient is that he's not yet feeling satisfied. And those words, all that you have done is considered, what an insult to Vyasadeva. He asked to find out the deficiency in him, but to say that all you've done is useless and worthless, I mean, I didn't really mean that you should be that serious in finding out the fault in me. Because those who are most exalted, the all-perfect they consider those type of words like the pilgrimage place of crows. That means garbage dumps. And they don't get any pleasure there. So we can, when I read things like this, I think, yeah, those people who write nonsense things are all blah, 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 blah. But then I think, oh, who gets pleasure in looking at them and reading them sometimes? It's me. Wait a second. Does that mean that so somehow or another, that there's an expression in English when you point one finger towards another, you're pointing more towards yourself. So it's really true. So when we read, the particular type of reading that we're going to ask you to do is not read for others, but read in such a way that you're taking instructions. You're sitting at Prabhupada's feet as he's writing his purports, his commentaries on the Bhagavatam, and he's speaking to you. And what deficiency is he trying to correct in me? And just imagine what your life would be like, as if how wealthy you would be if every day even you found one valuable jewel, and you collected it, and not what to speak of, applied it to your life or made the attempt to apply it to your life. I'm going to do this. You'd be so wealthy day after day after day doing this. And of course, Prabhupada's purports here are powerful. He loves to speak on points like that. And then on the other hand, Narada Muni says, the literature, that which is written, which is full of descriptions of the transcendental glories of the name, fame, form, pastimes, etc., of the unlimited Supreme Lord, is a different creation. It's not arising up from the modes of material nature, but rather it's descending from the spiritual realm. It has a different quality. It has a completely different, I think of it in terms of the different fragrance, because a fragrance has a subtlety about it. And it's full, the literatures that describe the glories of the Lord, Krishna, they have such a potency because they're from a different level. And it's like people now are trying to eat the reflection, the mirror reflection of the feast, and wondering why I'm not feeling satisfied. Well, the real object, reality, is on a completely different level. The substance, illusion, it's on a completely different level. We want to feast on substance. So the words that describe the name, form, pastimes of the Supreme Lord is a different creation. It's full of transcendental words directed towards bringing about a revolution in the impious lives of this world's misdirected civilization. In this one phrase, Prabhupada is explaining his emphasis on book distribution. Because the world, it's meant to bring about a revolution, a complete overthrow of the current way that things exist. A revolution in the impious lives. People don't know the difference between piety and impiety. So it's meant, these transcendental words that describe Krishna from a different level, and they're meant to overthrow the consciousness in the world's misdirected civilization. And these literatures, even though they may have so many imperfections in them, even though the other pilgrimage of Crow literatures may be written by the most expert authors, material authors, and they're full of perfect alliteration, perfect poetry, perfect this, perfect that. But these, even though they are imperfectly composed, still the purified men, and listen to this, who are thoroughly honest, they are accept those literatures, not the other ones that are superficially perfect. These people are thoroughly honest. What does it even mean to be thoroughly honest? You take that question when you to Giriraj, and that's something I'd like to say again and again. So many questions, so many questions, so many questions. Take them to Giriraj Govardhana. They're accepted by purified men who are thoroughly, completely honest. The nature of a conditioned soul is that he's thoroughly dishonest at the very core. Even when I or any conditioned soul does charity for the benefit of others, there's always some percentage he wants for himself. You like that point? In other words, the core of the conditioning of anyone who is in the material world, if one reads the third canto of the Bhagavatam, one understands the basis of the material world is ahankara. In Kapila Muni's teaching, it's false ego. And the essence of false ego is turning one's back, Krishna Bole Se Jeev, Anadi Mahimu, turning our back on Krishna. And there's some enviousness in the heart of every conditioned soul that why should everything in the spiritual world be centered around Krishna? What about me? Even one, recently, well, it was actually over a year ago, I was speaking to a group of friends who were doing something, devotee friends, and there was like one little girl there, and after I asked the question, anyone have any questions, she said, why does Krishna have to be the center? So that's a very heavy question. You should notice, because everyone who has a false ego, means every conditioned soul, is asking that same question. Why does Krishna have to be the center? Why not me? That is what ahankara means. Why does Krishna have to be the center? Why not me? And the trouble, of course, with me imagining myself the center is that I can't convince anyone else that I'm the center, not even the little kids. So what does it mean to be thoroughly honest? It means to be thoroughly humble. And what does it mean to be thoroughly humble? It means that you have prema bhakti, according to Srila Sanatana Goswami. And Prabhupada, you can imagine, has written powerful purports, long and powerful purports on this. And then another famous verse, that even if you have knowledge of self-realization, even if you know that you're a soul, even though you may not have any attachment to the world of matter, material affinity, but if the concept of God, a supreme person, is absent, that knowledge isn't good, it's useless too. What is the use if knowledge of that we're a soul is considered worthless? And what to speak of activities that are meant to bring us pleasure on the material level? They are painful, naturally. because they breed dissatisfaction. They are painful from the very beginning, and they are transient. That means the pleasures come and go and everything's always changing. If, and here is part of the solution to the problems that we face in this regard. They are painful, transient, always changing, if they are not utilized for the devotional service of the Lord. Na charpitam karmayadapakaranam. So this is an important point, that the question comes up: how can someone who's in the material world, who has material consciousness, and all his consciousness, all his conceptions are limited and material, and fallible and faulty, how can he get out of the material realm and get to the spiritual realm when he's in the material realm? And the answer is given here subtly. It's basically karma yoga. You use yat karosi rasnasi. You use whatever you do in Krishna's service and beg him to accept this. Even though it's basically material. Because the motivation isn't prema bhakti. Because Krishna patram pushpam palam tam yomam bhakti vyachati. He accepts what's given with love. And you don't have love, so he won't accept anything. But he's bhava, grahi, janardana. He's very, very kind. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains this in one commentary in the 10th canto, maybe in the 87th chapter, perhaps. That he explains that when someone is meditating on Krishna, his concept is not actually Krishna, even though he's thinking of Krishna according to his understanding of who Krishna is. He's thinking of Krishna and Krishna's beauty and what Krishna looks like, Krishna's form. But he's not touching Krishna actually, because Krishna's beauty is unlimited and our material concepts are material. So the material can never touch transcendence. But although that's true, Krishna is so kind. His mood is, oh, my devotee is meditating on me, how wonderful. And he reciprocates with that. Like Ajamil's chanting. Oh, Vyasadeva, your vision is completely perfect. Your good fame is spotless. You are firm in vow, and you are completely truthful. And thus, because you are situated in sattva-guna, in goodness, that means with a peaceful mind, you can think of the pastimes of the Lord. In trance, he's instructing him to meditate deeply and try and touch Krishna in that. And then you will be able to do this, and he's blessing him practically. You can do this for the liberation of the people in general from material bondage. And this is actually what happens very soon. Vyasadeva's meditation, Bhakti Yogena Manasi Samya Pranhite Amaraya Pasipush. He sees the Supreme Lord, but we're not up to that yet. And then based on Krishna's descent into his consciousness, where he sees all truths, he writes the Srimad Bhagavatam. And here's another point that explaining about you write from the level of transcendence. And if you don't write from the level of transcendence, if you don't act from the level of transcendence, if you read from the level of matter, if you hear from the level of matter, if you conceive from the level of matter, that everything that you describe that is separate in vision from the Lord simply reacts with different forms, names, and truth to agitate the mind as the wind agitates a boat which has no resting place. Now, this point, there's some more verses, but we've already covered so much, and I'd like to ask for questions, but this point is so important, is that we interact with the world as devotees, but I can speak for myself, tend to interact with the world with material consciousness. Even though externally I'm acting as a devotee, externally, but internally there's something else going on. Something other than me acting as a servant of Krishna. And that will interact with my consciousness. That interaction, there's nothing wrong with interacting with the material world, but material consciousness interacting with the material world causes unlimited disturbances to the mind because it's based on false ego, ahankara. And then thereby, it's not exactly the interactions with the material world that agitate our mind and make us dissatisfied. It's the material consciousness touching the material elements, our fate, our karma, the physical elements of the world. We touch that with our material minds, and the result is there's an interaction, and that interaction causes other interactions, which causes other interactions, which causes other interactions. And thus we find ourselves, by Krishna's kindness, very dissatisfied and wishing for something deeper. But the something deeper is the same thing that we've been told right from the beginning. It's that you're a servant of Krishna. Always keep that in your consciousness. Act from that platform. Always chant Krishna's names. Heal the great divide in the mind between this is for me, this is for Krishna. Somehow heal that. And of course there's a science of that, beginning with Karma Yoga. But the essence of what he's saying and will say is that you should hear. You write in such a way that when people hear what you've written, transcendental literatures, when people hear the sound vibration, the books that have descended from the spiritual world, it will affect their consciousness. And it won't react, and it will infect and affect their consciousness by creating desires for spiritual upliftment, to be there with Krishna. And when our consciousness interacts just on the material level, with material things, it also creates desires. But on the material level, with me in the center, Ishwaraham Maham Bhogi, I'm the center and the controller and the enjoyer, and it's all meant for me. And Krishna has nothing to do with that. So this will always give a conflict, an internal conflict between the devotee part and the practical reality that we're not fully there yet. And that conflict is Krishna tapping us on the shoulder and saying, you have some more internal work to do. To heal the divide, to see Krishna in all things, to serve him in all things at all times. And no amount of material achievement, even if you control the whole world and have it in the palm of your hand, will cause satisfaction of the soul. so many zeros. Okay, thank you. Any questions, comments? Raise your hands. Yes, Boo. What's your name? What's the first one?
Tribhanga.
Tribhanga.
As we say that, no butter. Maharaj, the transcendental literature, even though is not of the material modes, but we as a conditioned souls are definitely under the material modes. So when the interaction happens between the transcendental and the material things, does it have the same kind of intensity or impact that it will kind of uplift us from the material nature to the transcendental world? How the interaction happens between the because the meditation is transcendental, but we are under the material modes.
Yes, that's the point. Yes, but as Prabhupada said, even touching the book will help you. And even reading it superficially will help you. What to speak of reading it slowly and carefully, trying to let the words enter the heart and affect the consciousness, which is the type of reading that during this time we're requesting that you do. Yes. So you may not be, if one is perfect, just like if there's a perfect speaker and a perfect hearer, perfect means perfectly sincere hearer and a perfectly realized speaker, that if that connection between the two is there with faith, then the hearer will be able to experience exactly what the speaker is saying from his elevated platform. But if he's not on that level, depending upon what level he is, he'll experience more or less. So when you start reading, for example, and you realize that I'm not doing very well here, is that good or bad? Well, it's reality. Why call reality good or bad? This is the situation. This is my situation. How can I improve? So I suggest you, if you feel dissatisfied, you pray to Giriraj, to Guru Vaishnavas, to Mahaprabhu, to Nityananda Prabhu, all your favorite. That's why we're suggesting you have an altar set up. You pray deeply. And how deeply we pray depends on how deeply we need shelter. We feel we need shelter. So I find that, when my consciousness is superficial, then my prayers will be superficial. And if I'm in sufficient distress, I'll be more serious, or if my desire is increased. Is that clear? That is. Yes.
What is the process? I can speak louder. What is the process going from Yad Karosi to Tantra Pushpam, from Karma Yoga to Bhakti Yoga?
Karma Yoga is, according to our acharyas, is when I'm doing what I want, according to the modes of material nature of who I am, and I'm offering you the fruit. Oh Lord, please accept it. And bhakti is, I'm doing what you want and offering you the fruit. That's the technical difference. So the surrender is not just of the fruit, but it's the activity as well. And the activity, like Arjuna, good name, Arjuna, he was fighting, and even though he was a Kshatriya, which was the modes of material nature that he had, and he was trained as a Kshatriya, his fighting was bhakti, because he was fighting because Krishna wanted him to fight, and not for the kingdom, and not for this or that. That's bhakti.
Like didn't Krishna say karma and eva, you got your adhikar is
He was
karma.
speaking on the level of karma yoga then. but then he shifted to a higher level. After saying Yat Karosi Rasnasi, he says Patram Pushpam. It just often Bhakti Paritam. You do everything with bhakti, Swami, I will accept it, even if it's a leaf or fruit, if it's something insignificant. If it's given to me with bhakti, I will take it, I'll accept it. Yeah. This is the gift.
Maharaj,
And that will be
Maharaj, we have sometimes targets, we have targets in our life or in our temple schedules or in our own personal spiritual career template, if I can use that phrase.
spiritual career template. That's an interesting phrase. Describe spiritual life.
So, where we would like to complete reading of certain books or certain literature, how do we balance that with the need to be prayerful while reading?
Well, it's the same point. Why do you want to read all those books? Whose pleasure is involved? Is it centered on me, or is it centered on pleasing Guru Vaishnavas, etc.? And that's where the honesty really has to come. How much percentage is it for me in there? How much do I want people to think of me as a learned, as a this, as a that? So, and then we think, well, I want people to think of me because I need to be respected so I can perform my service. So how much, we may be thinking like that, so how much is performing the service and being respected is for me, or how much for? So conditioned soul always wants some cut, some percentage. But if we actually surrender, no, Jivera Sirupoi Krishna, I am a servant, like Lord Nrsimhadev offered Prahlad, what do you want? What do you want? Give you anything you want. Just imagine if the Supreme Lord told you that, at least how much trouble I'd get into. First person will cross out all these people from existing in the world, and then the second thing is, yeah, and Prahlad's answer is, no. I'm not a Panita. My relationship with you is I'm serving you because that's completely natural for me. That's who I am. I'm yours. I'm yours. And when one has that mood, I'm yours, then accompanying that is Mamata, you are mine. So in Goloka Vrindavan, you are mine is even dominant, because they so long ago, in one sense, become Krishnas. They only care for Krishna. They love him. Prema Bhakti. Last question.
Hare Krishna. I was wondering if you could shed a little light on, you mentioned that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that to be thoroughly honest, to be thoroughly humble means to have Prema Bhakti.
That was Sanatana Goswami.
That's another Goswami.
Yeah, and we had Bhagavatamrita. He explains that Dainya, or humility, is the same as prema. So actually, that in the Govardhan retreat, always that comes up in one class. It's because, as far as I can understand, when you're really humble, you understand that you're a tiny, insignificant soul, and you're dependent on Krishna completely. Completely, and you're not mental about it. You're his. That's who we are. So humility means pulling off all the things that aren't us, and just living in who we actually are. And who are we? It's hard to swallow, but we're insignificant. I mean, really, insignificant is how many. Sometimes I think that I want to become known, I want to become famous, but in 100 years from now, basically no one will even know I ever existed. Maybe 50 years, maybe 20 years, maybe 10 years or something. few people will cry, he was a nice guy, he once gave me a sweet or something. I loved him or something. But after that, insignificant. I mean, the universe is big, and there's many universes. And how many humans are in this world now? 7 billion maybe. And then how many living entities, including all the ants that are in my room? I mean, there's so many. So it's hard to accept it's impossible to accept when one has a false ego that I'm insignificant, that I'm insignificant. So when the only way to accept that is to become an insignificant servant of Krishna, and then there's meaning to my existence. And Krishna, please accept me as your servant. Otherwise, as Mahaprabhu said, my fly-like existence, na prema kanda.
But how does that dependence become love? Because we see that sometimes we depend on people for different things, but we don't necessarily come to love them.
But Krishna, but you don't really depend on them either, because you don't really trust them. And you don't trust them because they don't have the power to protect you. And they don't have the vow to protect you. Because ahankara essentially means that you're selfish. So how can you trust a person and give yourself to a person who's selfish? Because when it comes to choosing you or them, they'll choose themselves. So we don't really give ourselves, so therefore the love and the dependence in this world is only partial. I mean, that's true, isn't it? So when we hear about Krishna and just how he charmed the residents of Vrindavan, like in the Govardhan ceremony. Now, when he started taking out the cows, he did so much politics to get them to speak about, everyone was saying to them, anyway, this is a whole long lecture that I won't get into, not lecture, but katha. But the residents of Vrindavan, they just loved him. And the way he dealt, how beautiful he was, and his charisma, his power, his sweetness. This is the Supreme Personality of God, and we have to hear about him. Otherwise, there's no question about love. We have to hear about Vrindavan. We have to read, hear Krishna Bok, etc. Otherwise, we won't. And we have to read it from a devotional point of view. And that may take some time. Raise your hand if you have any deep questions now. Raise your hand if you have a deep question. Only one person. Wait, I didn't say I was going to call on you, and I'm not, because we're end of the questions and answers. But please take your question to Giriraj. On the deepest level. Because we have to keep going, otherwise we won't get our time alone with Giriraj.